CA for more details, or see me outside. One more storyteller for the first half. Another first-time storyteller, I think. Did you do a short story? No, you didn't. Well, I'm happy to have her here anyway. Please welcome to the stage, Tegan Weeb.
My roommates would call me a nude enthusiast. My parents would call me Tegan because they can never know about this. But it wasn't always that way. In fact, it was quite the opposite. And for much of my life, I hid my body not just from the world, but from myself. And before I had even finished puberty, I had grown to become deeply ashamed of it. It never seemed to quite meet the expectations that I or the world had for it. It was never quite thin or beautiful enough. And by 12, I had made myself lists of foods that I would never eat again because of their fat content. And by 14, I had taken to running so intently that I had worked myself into shin splints that lasted for years to come. And by 18, my diet and exercise had not just become a lifestyle, it had become an obsession. And by the time I moved here to Montreal for university, I was deeply unhappy at the direction that my life was going. I wanted to eat cake at my friends' weddings, and I wanted to play frisbee in the park with them, even if it didn't burn as many calories as doing wind sprints on my own. And I decided at that point I had had enough. And so for me, growing up in a spiritually inclined Christian home, that involved a lot of soul searching, a lot of meditation, and a lot of prayer. And I went through this process for some time, and it was at some point during my university years in Montreal that in this prayer and meditative process, I had this vision. And in this vision, I was finally free from the insecurity and hatred and the trapped feeling of my own physical body. And in this vision, I danced completely nude in this woodland that had been created as beautiful as I had. And I heard from this God that had always meant me to feel loved. And so, fast forward a few months later, I'm home in my small town in rural northern Ontario for the summer, home from university, and I'm going through this meditative process still, and I remember that image that I had, and I think, you know, why couldn't I actually do that? And so now the excitement's starting to build, and really the scene is set perfectly. I'm in rural northern Ontario. I'm surrounded by nothing but isolated woodland and lakeshore, beautiful nature. Not only that, but my parents have left me home alone for the weekend, which is important for two reasons. First of all, not only is public nudity considered slightly scandalous in my conservative Christian household, but also I'm not allowed to go into the woods on my own, given the notoriously large bear population. Of course, bears are dangerous. But I can't help but thinking that this moment will never be so opportune, and I decide I'm just going to go for it. So I have the perfect spot in mind. There's this gravel road near my house, and off that gravel road there's just isolated woods. And I think that's where I'm going to do it. So the adrenaline starts building and the excitement is going, and I head out for this road. And sure enough, a few ways down, there's this trailhead offshoot that goes off the main road. And I think that's where I'm going to do it. So I head down a little ways, just far enough that I can't be seen from the main gravel road. And I stop, and my moment has come. And it's perfect. It's warm, there's leaves rustling, there's birds singing. It's the perfect summer day. The moment practically begs for streaking. So, carefully and with a hint of paranoia, I begin to undress. And it takes a few moments to convince myself that no one is secretly watching me in the woods. But I manage to do that, and I start to relax. And then I dance. And it's even more beautiful than I had ever imagined. And for the first time, the world has seen my body and it has accepted it, and I have accepted it. And there's this moment of liberation and beauty as I dance in the woodlands, leaving my clothing behind in its oppressive pile. This goes on for several hours as I take in the beauty of the moment, until finally I'm suddenly brought back to reality when several hours later, resting on a rock, I find a little trickle of blood seeping into the stone. And sort of startled, I begin to do a body check, trying to remember having hurt myself or run into something, but I can't remember having done anything, and I'm sort of looking, and then there, between my legs, is the blood. And suddenly, all of the moments of my stupidity come together and hit me. Because there are two things that notoriously attract bears. And that is feces and used tampons. So not only have I ventured deep into the woods, not having told anyone where I'm going, and not even having anyone home to know if I've gone missing, but I'm now sitting naked in one of the most densely bear-populated regions in Canada, oozing the smell of mating season. So I begin a slightly less liberated and more hastened journey back to my clothing, all the while keeping better track of the wildlife surroundings. And I'm sort of making this trek rather distractedly this time, when I find myself having stepped clear out of the woods and onto the main publicly used gravel road. And so startled, I dart back into the woods and crouch for cover, and my mind starts racing about what has just happened. And I realize I've somehow managed to bypass my clothing, get lost, and end up somewhere back on the main road that I started on. And so I'm trying to think of my options at this point. I'm not about to go back into the woods at further risk of getting lost with who knows how many hungry and lusty bears now in my sight. And so I'm trying to think of ways to make it back home to my suburban home without being seen, but it seems like all of those options involve the potential of me being caught nudely menstruating on someone's front lawn. So I think I better not. I decide instead, I really have to find my clothing. So instead of heading back into the woods, I decide maybe I'll go along this gravel road in the cover of the trees inside the underbrush area, and I'll head along in the general direction of I think my clothing are until I find the trailhead that I started at and left my clothing at. So I begin this journey through the woods, and I don't know if you've ever tried bushwhacking in the buff, but imagine a human car wash where instead of brushes, it's sharp branches, and also you're naked. So this lasts about 10 minutes before I've had quite enough of that. And now I really do only have one option left. And that is, I'm going to have to take the main road. So I take a deep breath, and I summon all of the courage within myself. And I lunge out of the woods in one dramatic leap, and I take off. And now I'm sprinting, breasts in hand, dodging sharp gravel in my bare feet, leaving a beautiful trail of womanly blood. All the while hoping that no one is on this road, because it's a small town. If I run into someone, it's going to be someone I know, like a neighbor, or a friend, or a teacher. I'm doing this in these sort of intervals so that I can take some time to catch my breath, and I sort of crouch in the woods and catch my breath again before darting out and sprinting again. I'm doing this several times before an important yet unasked question occurs to me, which is, am I going the right direction? And I'm trying to remember landmarks, but all there are is just trees everywhere, trees in every direction. And so for the next half hour, I'm sprinting in both directions, changing my mind constantly about which tree I've already seen and whether it was before or after I was lost. And I just don't know, and I'm an exhausted, bloody disaster at this point. And somehow, on one of these many sprint intervals, I finally see it, the trailhead that I started at. And I take a huge sigh of relief, head down the trail a little ways, and sure enough, there's my neat little pile of clothing sitting in the woods. And I dress quickly, and I've gone, I think, unseen at this point. I shove some leaves in my shorts, and I begin waddling my way home through suburbia, unfazed at the blood dripping down my thighs, because hey, at least I'm clothed. And I make it home, and I clean up, and I reflect on what I've just done. And though much of it was panic-ridden, I know that in some way I've been freed, and in some way I've begun this journey of acceptance of myself. And from that day forward, whenever I'm alone or I find myself in an isolated woodland, I can't help but take the opportunity to be in the nude. Thank you.